You're listening to Feathers, a podcast of stories about God speaking and his people having just enough faith to believe him and obey. I hope these stories inspire you and encourage you to take flight in your own faith. I'm your host, Amy Bennett, and this is Season 2, Episode 1. Well, hey friends, and welcome to Feathers. I am so glad to have you here. I cannot believe we are starting Season 2. For those that need caught up, I did take a break during the summer and honestly really wasn't very sure that we were coming back. Just kind of waiting on the Lord to show me what was next. And he just really confirmed that we were supposed to continue and that the first half of the year, those episodes that we did were supposed to be a Season 1. And for the fall here, at the end of summer, we are starting up Season 2. So I love this concept. We're really taking it from the TV world of having seasons and episodes. So I know there's a couple other podcasters that do it and just really excited to bring that here to Feathers. So really excited to jump back into this. Today we have Emily Freeman. Emily is the author of Simply Tuesday, Grace for the Good Girl, Graceful, and A Million Little Ways. She also blogs at Chatting at the Sky and Hopeology and contributes to Daysprings Encourage. She and her husband live in North Carolina with their 3 children. I have met Emily a few times at a couple of her speaking engagements as she has put out her books over the years, and she has been such a mentor to me, really, through her writing and her blogging. Even her Instagram is just a beautiful place to go to just to see a lot of beauty and the simple moments in her life. And I'm just so excited to bring her. I couldn't be happier for you to hear her in this opening episode of Season 2. She has just a wonderful story of her and her husband following in obedience in his career. So let's go ahead and get started with Emily Freeman. Well, hey, Emily, and welcome to Feathers today.
I'm so glad to be here.
Oh, me too. So why don't we start out and have you introduce yourself and your family?
Sure thing. Well, I live in Greensboro, North Carolina with my husband. We've been married for about 14 years now. We have 3 kids, twin girls who are headed to middle school, 6th grade this year, which is a big deal to us.
Yeah.
And then our son is going into 3rd grade. And so we live for the last 6 years, we've walked our kids to school, a public school that's right in our neighborhood. And so that's been such a normal part of our life. But now the girls are going to a different school. So this will be the first time in our parenting life that we'll have kids at 2 different schools. So we're entering this new thing.
Yes, and we just walked through that. My oldest daughter, she's 12 as well, but she is starting 7th grade. So last year was our whole entry into middle school and having 2 drop-offs in the morning and all of that. And I would just tell you, we struggled a bit in the morning because I had my 25-minute window. I'd drop the kids off and then have 25 minutes to do my exercise. And then, I would start my work day. Well, when we had to do both drop-offs, that 25-minute window was taken up with going to middle school. So I lost that. So it did kind of, shake things up. I had to figure that out.
It does shake things up.
But I will say that we loved middle school. My daughter, I know it's different for everybody, but we had a great year.
I'm glad to hear that. I love when people tell me that.
I know. I was so scared of middle school for my daughter. And she tells me, she's like, Mom, you wouldn't believe what people say. You wouldn't believe the drama, but she kind of stays out of it.
That's nice. She's a good kid.
So far, we stay out of the drama. So I don't know. I know there's some kids that have horrible middle school experience. I feel so bad for them. But so far, there is hope. There are some kids that do really well. She loved changing classes and all of that.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Yeah. So you are gearing up. Your book is coming out in August. So what kind of summer have you had? Has it been crazy busy, or you've been able to get some vacations in?
We went on our beach vacation. We go every year because we live just a few hours from the coast, and we went right when school got out, as in like the day after school got out. So I feel like we kicked off the summer pretty quickly. And it is kind of interesting having a book release at the end of summer, just because I'm sort of gearing up for something where everyone else has kind of disappeared, and I envy that in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also, I think it's kind kind of getting me in the mode maybe just a few weeks early, which isn't, I guess, a bad thing. But it's been a fun summer. We've had a good summer. And I always remember my sister talks about on her blog every summer, she counts down the number of summers she has left with her boys because, you know, we only get 18 summers with our kids under our roof. Right. And so this is her son's last summer, you know, not before he goes off to college. So I try to remember that with my own kids, just sort of like, okay, we've got however many more left, and not as a like, you know, womp womp, but just as a let's number the days and, you know, make them count. So anyway, I've been trying to keep that in mind this summer. It doesn't always work out that way, but it's nice to remember at the forefront.
I think so too. And I actually said that to my husband. I'm like, you know, we only have like 5 summers with Emma. I'm like, we got to do something. Like, we actually are going to have to plan.
Right.
I actually just heard somebody, there's a blogger who has a site, and I think it's something that their church does. When they, I think it's when they do the baby dedication, they hand them a jar, and it has like, I can't remember, like 936 pennies, or it has some sort of number of pennies. And you're supposed to, I think it's weeks, like a penny for every week. And there's like 936. And so every Sunday or something, you're supposed to take out a penny so you can see how much time you have. Wow. So I thought that was a great visual.
That's a great visual and maybe terrifying.
I know. Especially if you like back up, and if I were to do it for my 12-year-old and she's almost 13, I'm like, oh, my jar would not be very.
Jar. Right.
Yeah. I remember going to my daughter's 9-year-old checkup at the doctor, and he looked at me and said, you know, you're halfway done, right? I was like, what? Oh, my gosh.
You know, like, I'm a grown woman, you know, and I still need my mom. So she's not done yet. So really, it's almost done, but not really.
I agree. I do agree. And I know there would be a lot of parents that would tell me they don't necessarily leave at 18.
Right.
Yeah. So, all right. So, I want to jump into your story today because I'm excited for people to hear it. And your story of your faith journey really centers around your husband and his job and that journey you guys have been taking the past couple years. So how about you kind of rewind time a little bit and start at the beginning of that?
Sure. Well, when my husband and I got married, he was in seminary, or he'd just finished seminary. And, it was sort of one of those things where he got his MDiv and he was thinking like, I'll probably be a pastor of some kind. But the only job available at the time was a youth pastor job. And so he took it because he was getting married. He needed a job. But he's also very loyal. So he maybe didn't plan to be a youth pastor for 12 years, but that's what ended up happening. And so for the first 12 years of marriage, he was a youth pastor at great churches and loved it. But when we really took a step back and looked at sort of how he's wired and how we believe the Lord has designed him to uniquely display God's glory and to relate with people in the world, youth pastoring became less and less of a fit. But let me tell you, when you've been doing that for 12 years and that's all you've ever known as a married couple, to consider anything else feels a little bit scary. And my husband kind of got to the point where I would ask him just like dreaming questions, you know, not even like, let's make a plan, but just if you could do anything, you know, what would it be? He couldn't answer the question. It just was too terrifying for him. He was too logical and like, well, I can't answer that because of A, B, and C. But there was a summer where he ended up being able to answer that question. It came after a time of deep grief when his dad passed away. And there was something about the grief that opened up within his soul the ability to access desire as well. I think grief and desire live really close to one another in the soul. I don't know if that's too nebulous to imagine, but for him, when he was able to access the grief, he was also able to access desire. And he became almost more fully alive once he sort of walked through the process of grieving the loss of his dad. And so that sort of set us on a journey of uncovering what might John really want to do for the second half of life vocationally? What might that look like? And what might be our next steps? What I found in that sort of that walking together with John was a lot of fear, a lot of fog, and a lot of testing of our faith. I don't even know if I theologically know what that means, testing of your faith. But I know that together, as we continued, you know, he was a youth pastor of, maybe there were hundreds of students. I don't remember the exact number, hundreds of students in this big church. And And we got to the point where we realized, we really feel like the Lord is calling us out. And we talked with the pastor and his bosses and all the people we need to talk with. It was a long transition process. It was a lovely transition. People were great. But the scariest part, Amy, was that we didn't really know what was next. But we felt a strong call for him to step out and then step into a period of waiting. And for him, it was sort of a letting go of some identity issues because, you're a youth pastor at this huge church. There's some support and some identity that comes along with that. For me, I think I didn't even realize how much I had some of my identity in that the fact that my husband was a pastor at this respected church until it was gone. And then we're sort of in this time of open, like what's next? We're waiting, we're praying, we're listening, and nothing seemed clear. And so that we walked through that for about a year and a half of sort of listening and waiting and not sure what was next. And it was a lovely time, and it was a scary time, too.
Yes, that's a long time to have the big question mark there.
Yeah, yes. It was a long time. It was. But it's one of those things where, looking back, I can sort of see, I call them arrows, where I feel like the Lord was he wouldn't tell us where we were going to end up, which he never does, right? Mm-hmm. But he would give us arrows along the way and sort of like this way, not that way, or this person, not those people, as far as like who to connect with or what might be next. And it was a series of arrows that we followed to where, now he ended up, we met with some friends. Here's one thing that we did that's really practical and that anybody can apply in any unknown situation. When we didn't really know what to do, we decided to gather some people we called our co-listeners, and we invited them to our house and just said, guys, you guys know us really well. We don't really know what our next steps are. We're not asking you what our next steps are, but we just want you to listen with us, be co-listeners to us and in the presence of Christ, and then maybe just tell us what you hear. And it was a group of maybe 6 or 7 people we really trusted, men and women, some older, some younger. And that night we look back on as sort of a real marker of what was going to come next for us. And it's been, and I look back and I think, at the time we were hoping for answers maybe, but I look back and I just think, that was just the Lord loving us and being with us in that time. I think so many times I put my eyes on the end, like, well, what's the end game or where we can end up? And then when I look back, I feel like the Lord is always more like teaching me, ending up someplace is good, but being with me in the process is even better.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I actually was at the She Speaks conference recently, and I heard somebody say, and it was related to speaking, and I think it can be applied, and I think it's related to what you were just talking about, is that the Holy Spirit will give us a calling, but then will affirm it and confirm it through his people. So I love that. That's kind of what you guys were doing. Not that you even had a direction, but that there were people around you to say, right, yes, we see that you're in a waiting state. And yes, as you walk, that does seem right or wrong or, whatever.
Right. And it does. I think sometimes I discount the presence of God within other people. Mm-hmm. And I forget how, yes, he speaks through scripture, and yes, he speaks through prayer and through sermons, but he so often speaks through other people, maybe not like theological, but yes and no's, but connection and community and affirmation and love. And that's been a great gift to us during this season.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I know my mom does this a lot for me. And, I'll go off I'm a thinker. And so I'll go off the deep end and start thinking about things and reasoning them out and have all these thoughts. And by the time I get to the end of myself, I'm like, I'm just so confused. And my mom's like, what are you talking about? Like, that's not right. I just think that sometimes that they are like a voice of reason, common sense reason. So yeah, I think and we've talked
right
about on the podcast how important community is, and, definitely think that's a good next step maybe for some people listening, is to find those co-listeners, that, as you call it. Okay, so you guys are in this waiting time. So what was next?
So actually that very night when we met with our friends, as John was explaining what he really longs to do, which is basically he wanted to walk with people and really do the work of pastoring, but maybe without some of the responsibilities that come with having to do it in a church. A lot of times I think pastors, sometimes the third or fourth priority on their list is actually the work of pastoring.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes and it's not necessarily their fault, it's just that's how church goes. You have to go to meetings. You have to have certain programs. And sometimes the ministry of sitting with people gets lost because you simply don't have time or space. And I think that's a real tragedy, what we've seen in the church, in our experience. And I think that's one reason why pastors get burnt out. And so he was just kind of sharing with the group what he would love to do, which is sort of be a person who stands between the work that pastors do and the work that counselors do, and sort of be the person in the middle of that. Maybe I think there's a lot of people in the church who fall between the cracks of maybe they're not going to meet with their pastor. It doesn't seem that dire, but it's not clinical. So they're not going to necessarily meet with a counselor or a therapist either. It's more of a soul care type of person that they want to walk with, and even a discipleship type of role. And so that's the type of thing that he was longing to do. And in that evening, when we share with our friends, they all said, well, it sounds like it's the work of a nonprofit. That's, the government has set up the nonprofit entity to allow people to do that type of work. Sounds like that's what you are looking for or would need or could fit with what you want to do. And everyone agreed on that. And then another person in the room was like, and by the way, I have one that I've set up that I used for years. He was a mentor of John's, but he's retired, and he's been praying about who could step into that role and sort of take over the ministry that he had started. And so that night sort of began the process of John stepping into that same role that a mentor of his from years ago had done for him. Now he's sort of stepping into that role in our own community and doing that for those here. So it's a small start, and it's been a journey to get there, but it's been such a lovely answer to prayer. And we're still kind of seeing how that is going to unfold.
Wow. So that's amazing.
Like, that's very
the person
nice.
in the same room
right.
had the answer.
Right.
Oh, it's one thing to just somebody affirm it. It's a different thing for somebody to affirm it and then say, hey, I've got the position for you.
Right away.
Wow. So he is, I guess, settling into that and finding that that's what his soul was longing for.
Yeah, it is. And it comes with, it's funny, when you end up doing something that you feel like this is where the Lord has led, there's a tendency to think that, once I fill in the blank, whatever, arrive to that place, or once I know, everyone romanticizes, or at least I do, what that's going to feel like. But what actually happens is you're still you with your insecurities and weirdness and twistiness on the inside. And so, we found that we've sort of traded one set of difficulties and fears and insecurities for a different set. And so we still need Jesus just as much, if not more. Mm-hmm. But it's just, it manifests itself a little differently. But now the fear is, and it's a lot of what I've been thinking about for the past couple of years is, wow, I love in the Bible how the Bible talks about, don't despise the days of small beginnings, for the Lord longs to see and delights to see the work begin. But I know that I have sometimes exalted those small beginnings because in my mind, they're eventually going to lead to big endings. Right. But a lot of things don't lead to big endings. There's small beginnings and there's small endings. And so when we've thought about this ministry and his ministry and where he might go next, there's a tendency to think, I think in the church a lot of times we talk about God blessing something and we say it's because how it's growing or how big it is or how many people know about it. And we equate God's favor with size. And I think that's a big mistake. If that was the way that God's favor rested, I think he would have come as a king and not as a baby. And so I'm trying to remember and to apply that in our everyday life, not just in theory, but like when this ministry feels really small, to celebrate that and to know that it might stay that way and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I think that's a perfect segue there into the book that you've written, Simply Tuesday, and you talk a lot about these. The tagline is actually small moment living in a fast moving world. And so you talk a lot about giving reverence to the small moments as well of what we quote unquote think are big moments. And two of the questions that you ask in your introduction really resonated with me. And I think it's so applicable to these conversations about, our faith journeys and walking in obedience to God. And you say, what if instead of thinking we have to choose between our ordinary life and an extraordinary life, we begin to realize they're the same thing? What if we stopped asking God for big ways to serve him and started walking with our friend Jesus into the next simple moment in front of us. So can you talk about those questions and one other particular thing that you talk about in the book is what's ordinary time and those moments kind of in between and what you call Tuesday moments, right? Your small Tuesdays. Can you just talk a little bit about, how you answered those questions and what the Simply Tuesday phrase means to you?
Sure. Well, it's funny. Tuesdays have always been kind of a day that represents my regular life. And I think maybe for all of us, Tuesday does. If you want to know what your regular life is, just look at what you do on your Tuesdays. For so long when John worked on Sundays, Sunday wasn't really a Sabbath. So for me, we just sort of chose, in my mind, I just chose Tuesday to make that more of a day to really slow and pay attention. And it's funny, for years on the blog, actually, I opened up Tuesdays as a time to sort of celebrate our regular lives because it was during a time when the kids were really, really little and I just needed a place to feel like a person and to know that other people were sort of in the trenches of and I'm making lunch again. Now we got to make dinner and the people keep eating food and I keep having to clean up the food and it's sort of Groundhog Day. And so Tuesdays became where before they maybe were a day of just here we go again, they became a day I looked forward to just because I knew there were other people who were going to be looking at Tuesdays differently with me because I did a link up on the blog where we called it Tuesdays Unwrapped and we sort of made it a fun little thing. And so that was years ago. And so ever since then, Tuesdays have just kind of been like, oh, it's Tuesday. Yay, Tuesday. It's just to sort of represent, this is my regular life. This is where I live. I'm not traveling on Tuesdays. I'm home on Tuesdays. And I just think of it as a lot of times we say, oh, the small moments count. And I think when people hear that, they think maybe the wink across the room or the butterfly kiss or all the sweet moments. And certainly those moments are important and they count. But the truth is all of life is not only filled with the beautiful small, it's also filled with the mundane and also with the growth, that small look that person gave me that made me feel really small, or that moment where I felt rejected that I don't realize it until I go to bed that night and I can't sleep because I'm thinking about, now why did she say it that way? Or why did he look at me like that? How we do. And those are little small moments that I think that someone might say, Emily, you're making a big deal out of nothing. But isn't that where we live? Those small moments are kind of what shapes our days. And in turn, that's what shapes our life. And so, I think it's a mistake to sort of have our eyes set on the big things we can do for God and the big ways we can serve if we're ignoring those small ways where Christ wants to be united with us in our responses and those little things. That's where our true spiritual formation happens within us so that we are equipped to then go and perhaps do big things or more small things in His name. I don't know. And so I thought about that sort of concept of ordinary time and how important it is. And then as I started to learn about a little bit more about the church calendar and I always knew about Christmas and Easter because I grew up in church and I knew about that stuff, but it wasn't until I read a book by Kimberly Conway Ireton called The Circle of Seasons, where she explains that the church year or the liturgical year is divided into two halves. And the first half is sort of the December Advent half. And the second half is from Pentecost until late November. And the first half is like Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, and then Lent, Easter, Pentecost. But then at the end of each cycle comes a season that's called ordinary time with a capital O and a capital T. And when I learned that there is a season of ordinary time, it's like I felt so affirmed because someone, whoever it is in the church history that named that, recognized that it was important enough to be named. And I think that if you look at the calendar and you count off those parts of the liturgical calendar, ordinary time is the longest part. It's the most days fill up ordinary time, and I think that's significant. And so how we fill those ordinary moments really do matter.
I love a quote that you have on in Moments in Time chapter in your book, and it's right after you're talking about this ordinary time. And it says, to learn to live well in ordinary time is to keep company with Christ on our simple Tuesdays and remember how He delights in keeping company with us. And I love that because and I love that it's actually part of a calendar because there's purpose then. And somebody isn't there such power in naming something?
There's
just
such
to have
power, yes.
Yes, and actually naming that's a real thing, ordinary time, and that has a purpose. And really what you're saying here in this quote is it's really about abiding with him in that time and how critical that is, especially when we think about these faith journeys. Like we can't know what to do, in our faith if he doesn't tell us, and we don't know. I mean, he's not going to tell us if we're not taking the time to stop and hear.
That's right.
And even in all these small moments. So I just love that concept.
It's so important because, I mean, I don't know about you, Amy, but I sense within myself almost daily, maybe minutely, the temptation to be building something, whether it's my reputation, whether it's my home, whether it's my kids, whether it's my job. It's always this sense of I should be doing more. You're behind. You have to run to keep up. There's sort of always a temptation within me to be building something. And this whole book, this whole writing process, my whole journey with Christ in the past couple of years has been the discovery of what it means to release my obsession with building my life and instead trust in the life Christ is building within me. And I'm discovering he does that one small moment at a time.
Yes. I've told you before we were talking that this book is just really tracking with where I am personally, and I think it's just so true. Is I don't know if you've done the Strengths Finders.
I've not.
Personality thing, but they give you like top 5 things about your personality that your strengths. And the whole point of Strengths Finders, it's coming in the corporate world, and I think even in the church world, a lot of people are doing it, is to build on your strengths and instead of trying to improve your weaknesses. So one of my top 5 strengths is achiever. So I totally get that, wanting to build. Like, if I am not achieving something, I mean, even in the description it says, like, even on vacation, it is not a successful vacation unless I've done something. So, yeah, I mean, I totally track with that and feeling the need to build, but that is something that God is teaching me as well, is just what he's building in me in that relationship that we're building within me, and not something that I'm building for him outside of myself.
That's right.
Another thing that you talk about in another chapter, it's called Success and Envy, and I think it kind of relates to what we were just talking about, but you talk about the idea of, the quote is focusing on your corner of the pool, and it came from a visit you had, I guess it's to Great Wolf Lodge, because I live nearby Charlotte, and we have one of those in Concord. So our family just visited there a couple months ago. So I love this little story and how you related to success and envy and what that looks like. Can you talk a little bit about where that kind of phrase came from?
Yeah, so we went to the water park, which was inside. And for those of you who don't live in hot land or cold land, then like if you live in Florida, you probably don't have indoor water parks. Do they? I don't know. I talked to some people in Florida, and they were like, what now? You do what now?
Why would you do that?
We can swim outside in the summer, but then in the winter, people who feel like they can't survive without a pool like to go to indoor water parks. For me, it's the worst idea in the world. It's like really hot and sticky, and you have to get in your bathing suit, and you're white as a ghost, and, you stand on steps, and it's wet, and there's like
gross water,
people behind you on steps in a bathing suit. You get what I'm saying. So I just didn't love it. It wasn't my favorite thing. But then I saw, like, I was, I think on like the Totem Towers, waiting to get wet and go down the slide, and the kids love it. They think it's great. But I was standing, I had a bird's eye view up high on the ladder, and I looked over far in the corner, and I saw all these lounge chairs, and all the moms were like sitting on the chairs without their bathing suits on, reading books. And I'm thinking, oh, I've been doing this wrong. I need to forget my bathing suit next time we come to one of these places.
Oh, man.
And I didn't even think about a bathing suit. And so I think we had 2 days at that place, or maybe it was the next time we went. I don't know, but I ended up doing that. John was great. He's like, oh yeah, he thinks it's fun. I don't get it. But anyway, so I went and sat with the other moms with my book. But what happened in that moment was I realized that there was too much going on. I couldn't really focus on my book. But instead, what caught my eye was the lifeguards. For all of the ill will I hold towards these water parks, the one saving grace for these water parks are the lifeguards. I think they're really, trained really thoroughly, and at least the ones where I was, these guards never stopped moving, and they never took their eyes off the water. They walked with the whistle in their mouth, like not even around their neck, but it was like ready, at the ready. And I watched as they would pace about 8 feet of pool back and forth and back and forth. And then every, I don't know what it was, 15, 20 minutes or whatever, they would rotate. And so another person would come. And a phrase that my dad always says, which I kind of got, but never quite fully, he always used to tell us to stay in our corner of the pool when we would get overwhelmed or think that we had to do everything, or look at the work of someone else. He would say, you just stay in your corner of the pool. And it was in that moment when I watched those lifeguards, guarding their 8 feet of the pool, when I realized that my only responsibility was to, if I start to look at the other parts of the pool that other people have in charge of, then I'm taking on too much, because that's somebody else's job. But my only job is to look at my 8-foot assignment, and what might that look like for me today. It takes a lot of the pressure off, and those lifeguards gave me a visual for that and what that might mean, because the best way to sabotage my own success is to be obsessed with someone else's. And the same goes for my own work or my own life or my own family. And so, that was my visit to the water park. Something good came out of it. I'm happy to report.
Oh, that's funny. I just think it's so important as everybody is dealing with comparison, and just thinking of just that reminder that God has a specific assignment for us, and that's what we need to concentrate on. But also, I think it was really important for me to think about that sometimes I'm going to have to go it alone, and I mean with Christ, but go it alone in that He's going to give me an assignment that somebody else is not going to have. And so I have to be courageous in that and saying, this is the assignment He's given me, and I really actually need to do it, instead of trying to get somebody else to come into my assignment.
That's right.
With me. I don't know. If you want another kind of like picture of it, do you know how like girls just have to go to the bathroom together?
Oh, they have to. Yeah, it's a must.
Yeah. So you're like, I need to go to the bathroom. Do you want to come with me? I mean, I think that's pretty standard at a restaurant.
Right.
Yes. And I think sometimes I have the tendency to say, God has given me the assignment. Don't you want to come with me? And just waiting on somebody to like help me and like go with, and it's not saying that we aren't going to have help and Christ isn't going with us, but I think sometimes we have to have the courage to step out and say, no, God made you this way and you have this gift and you're going to have to actually do it. So I found that it was kind of like both sides of the coin for that for me.
That's
but
good.
Also, just thinking about comparison to also say, well, God gave me this part of the pool. And even though I'm looking across the pool and seeing somebody else's, to not desire theirs.
Right.
All right. So Emily, thanks so much for being here today. I'm so excited about this book, and I think it's going to be really powerful for people to step into these small moments of their life. Tell us when it's coming out, where we find you, and find the book.
Sure. The book, official release date, U.S. release date is August 18th. And you can find it wherever books are sold, should be available. And also at simplytuesday.com is where sort of I have more information about the book and sort of kind words. And I also have a free video series that we created as kind of an introduction to the concepts in the book, but also it stands alone in that I just really wanted to be able to offer people some practical ways to help create space for your soul to breathe even in the midst of your busy life. And so you can find that free video series there.
All right. Thank you. Well, thanks so much for spending time with me today.
It's been so fun. Thank you.
Well, friends, I hope you enjoyed Emily's story and a sneak peek of her upcoming book, Simply Tuesday. In case you missed it during the episode, it's releasing on August 18th, just 1 week from the date of this episode. And I think her story and her book are just perfect for the start of season 2, because her and her husband's steps of obedience in his career were really the big steps of obedience we like to talk about. Leaving a job you've had for years with nothing on the horizon. It takes a lot of faith, a lot of prayer, and a lot of just straight obedience. And this podcast concentrates on stories like those of being faithful and obedient, and we love those dramatic stories. And they are absolutely part of our faith journey, and that's what I want to encourage you in. But I don't want to miss those small moments that Emily talked about. Our faith journey is about walking with God and Him being present with us along the way. So let me encourage you, no matter where you are in your journey, just to keep seeking after Him. He promises to be faithful and be with us every step of the way, big or small. So as always, you guys can find the show notes over at featherspodcast.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next week on Feathers.